Welcome to a new series on this channel called Women of Horror, where we will be looking at some iconic performances in films from female actresses. Today, Sarah Butler of I Spit on Your Grave and I Spit on Your Grave 3, Vengeance is Mine. Now, the films are not under review here, as later on in the series we will look at some less than reputable entries. So, when we look at the particular film, it's the character-actress performance ratio that qualifies her, not the quality of the film. Now, women have been mainstays in horror for the past forever. Whether the object of a lustful Dracula, the helpless heroine being attacked by an ape, the possessed child and toy of the devil, right through to the final girl of the slasher film. Women have had it rough in so many films and yet have excelled every time. One film which has a genre all of its own is the rape revenge genre. One of the most recent entries in this genre, aptly titled Revenge, will be discussed in another video on this channel, but as a fan of revenge films full stop, I feel I have to commend what Butler did and what made her character so great. In terms of women in films, there have been some brilliant books written about the subject. Try picking up Men, Women and Chainsaws by Carol J. Clover for some excellent historical studies, one I read myself at university many years ago. So let's get to it. Let's focus on Sarah Butler. Sarah Butler has not necessarily had the most reputable filmography, but although I quite enjoyed The Demented, the role she is most famous for is Jennifer Hill's. Butler was born in 1985, and after some TV appearances and the less than reputable movie Flu Bird Horror, she continued to job around in TV and low-budget films. In 2010, nobody called for a remake of I Spit on Your Grave, but we got one nonetheless. Blame the rise of Saw, Hostel and other so-called torture porn. Directed by Stephen Munro, a remake of the 1978 film, fun fact, when Jennifer fills up a gas tank at the petrol station, the amount is $19.78. Anyway, the film received mostly poor reviews, with only a few critics warming to it. In all honesty, it wasn't a film anyone was crying out for, but in the spirit of milking the torture porn brand, it was inevitable that someone would dig it up from the archives. Munro's film follows the narrative of the original, but there are some exceptions, most notably the lack of sexualisation in both the build-up and also Jennifer's revenge. She takes on a role more akin to Jigsaw than the seductive methods used by Camille Keaton in the 1978 film. Butler gives a powerhouse of performance, and if any doubts remain, check out what her co-stars say on the making of on the Blu-ray as they wax lyrical about what she had to go through and the challenging nature of the material. Seriously, it's an amazing performance, be it the gentle city girl surviving the horrific 25-minute rape scene, or taking revenge in the last third when she takes her life back and makes her abusers suffer. Speaking of the rape scene, it's less protracted, although no less humiliating, and after surviving the ordeal, Jennifer runs into the sheriff, who turns out to be part of the gang, and her ordeal continues. This is interesting, and in prelude to the Me Too movement, Jennifer finds a man she thinks is an authority and could help her, a figure who should side with her, but he's corrupt, sides with her attackers, and makes sure that her ordeal remains hidden and just goes on even longer. Jennifer's revenge is where Butler shines, though, as each rapist gets a very specific death based on what they did to her during the assault. The one who made a filleted gun has his teeth pulled out, and the anally obsessed man gets a shotgun up his... Yeah, you don't need me to fill that in, do you? Jennifer isn't seductive or boast of the city life she has, nor does she look down on the locals, and her rapists have more anger and rage than the previous films, so it's here that both surviving the ordeal and taking revenge that Butler owns the film. Once her revenge comes into play, we must take a little pinch of salt with the plot holes as she goes off, lives in the woods and slowly drags the men into paranoia as she torments them. There is no seduction here. She doesn't use a single trope of her femininity, and as her crusade builds, so does her rage. She's a survivor of abuse. She is an avenger for the woman who was destroyed, so, as she takes down the gang of sickening men, she has more masculinity and aggression than the 1978 version, which used feminine seduction methods. Butler has the appearance of a villain now, and, as she is in control of the men, she breaks them psychologically and then physically. There is more feminist angles as she bullies and torments the men. She's stronger than them, and she exerts justice on them accordingly as they break apart, become meek and fear the woman who now rises. Butler gives a relentless, reflex, dominant and barbarous performance, and that's why she gets the inaugural spot on this list. She repeats their mocking language as she attacks and kills them and reminds them how it feels to be degraded. There's more than justice here. The men are put in their place and made to feel how she feels. Like all girls in horror who stand at the end, she grows and changes into something much more animalistic. Sweet Nancy starts Elm Street in the submissive and meek role, but by the end she's a full-blown warrior. Jennifer isn't in a slasher film, but she is in a torture porn film, so she isn't going quietly. She isn't just facing a villain with a knife. She has a whole cabal of people to deal with, and she needs to be more smart, physical and merciless so she doesn't fall weakness to empathy or fall to their taunts. We follow the rape revenge trope. Egregious act is met with an even more egregious revenge, and as the city girl falls to the country thugs, she devolves into an animal and leaves everything about herself behind. The men don't deserve empathy here, and they don't get any. Yes, they are caricatures, but the idea of feminist revenge and putting the men in a position where each one of them feels bad is much more modern, and, whilst I Spit on Your Grave is hardly a masterpiece of the feminist movement, Jennifer's strength and justified retribution are both palpable and perfectly played. Also, it's worth remembering that Jennifer doesn't actually kill in the sense of slitting throats, etc., but instead leaves them to bleed, burn in acid, or be pecked to death. There is no suggestion of a happy ending, there's no twist where she's delusional or tricked or it's a dream, she's just a strong and assertive female character. After the increasingly more mean-spirited sequel, which she wasn't in, where the sexual ordeal is even more sadistic, Butler reprised her role for I Spit on Your Grave 3, Vengeance is Mine. Here, now suffering from PTSD and trying to rebuild her life, Jennifer attends rape support groups, tries to build a life of her own, and, after one too many stories she doesn't like, becomes an avenging angel where she continues her sadism in taking down reprehensible men. The film is one-dimensional and has more in common with Michael Winner's Dirty Weekend than I Spit on Your Grave, but it wisely eschews another protracted rape scene and just has Hills as the vigilante that we cheer as she does things such as only rapes a paedophile with a pipe. The film isn't going to win any awards, but it's nice to see some continuity, have Butler back, and also see a different tack than just a prolonged assault and prolonged revenge. Yes, she still needs rescuing from a bodybuilding rapist at the end, but now, years on from Saw and torture porn, this film is a trashy look at PTSD and rape revenge genre. I don't think I Spit on Your Grave can be labelled as truly feminist cinema. After all, these films are written and directed by men. If you want a more female take on the genre, then check out Revenge by Coralie Faget. It's a much more apt discussion and one I will do at a later date. Butler is marvellous, and it's a shame she hasn't done more horror, which is noteworthy really. But from the perspective of this film, she is relentless, visceral and brilliant. As final girls, revenge-fueled heroines and great actresses go, she is fantastic, and for that reason, her performance gets her the inaugural nod in this Hall of Fame. Butler turns the tide, subdues her aggressors, looks mean, and she gives a powerhouse of performance. She truly gave an otherwise substandard film a much higher quality than it ever should have been. Speaking of revenge, I've written a book, which is on sale now, called Skin of a Harem. It's a story of a girl's 10-year mission to find her abusers and rebuild her life. Inspired by my love of revenge film, it's on sale at Amazon now, in paperback or Kindle. Anyway, next up we'll be doing Lisa Wilcox of Nightmare on Elm Street 4 and 5, and then we'll be checking out Naomi Harris and 28 Days Later. So, until next time, I'll catch you later.